The red lipstick on his collar was the first thing Rosa saw. Not on Patrick's shirt. That would be too predictable. No. The lipstick was on the white towel folded over the marble console in the penthouse, as if someone had wiped their lips there before leaving. Careless, obvious, insulting. Rosa stopped in the center of the living room that cost more than most houses in Italy. Her heels sank into the Persian rug that had probably seen more secrets than she would ever know. The air still carried a perfume that wasn't hers, something floral, cloying, cheap. 30 seconds. That's how long she'd been there. 30 seconds, and she already had all the answers she needed. The office door opened. Patrick Ferrante emerged, adjusting his shirt cuffs as if it were any ordinary afternoon. Dark hair impeccably slicked back. A jawline that looked like it had been sculpted by someone with serious anger issues. And those eyes. Gray, cold, calculating. Eyes that assessed her from head to toe as if she were an investment he still wasn't sure was worth it. Rosa. His voice was deep, controlled. You're early. And you apparently finished late. His jaw locked for a fraction of a second. Almost imperceptible. Almost. Rosa had 23 years of practice reading the Ferrantes. Every micro-expression, every hesitation, every lie disguised as truth. She had grown up observing, learning, surviving. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. She walked to the console, picked up the towel between two fingers as if it were contaminated material, and lifted it toward the light. The lipstick gleamed, blood red against the Egyptian cotton. Maybe your cleaning staff knows, or maybe... She sniffed the fabric and wrinkled her nose. Fake Chanel No. 5. Seriously, Patrick, if you're going to have a mistress, at least choose one with good taste. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Patrick didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched her with that patient predator expression that probably worked on everyone else. Men trembled before him. Women melted. The entire Milan underworld knew that crossing Patrick Ferrante was signing your own death warrant. Rosa dropped the towel back onto the console. Are you finished? He asked. Barely started. Did you come here to discuss my personal life or to... Your personal life? Rosa let out a short, humorless laugh. Interesting choice of words for a man who in 3 weeks is going to marry me. Patrick crossed the room in 3 steps. He was tall, irritatingly tall, and used every inch of his height to intimidate. He stopped less than a meter from her, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him, but not close enough to touch her. He never touched her. In 18 years since she was 5 years old and was introduced to the Ferrante twins as the future bride of one of you, Patrick had never laid a finger on her. Not a handshake that lasted longer than necessary. Not a hug at the funerals that were far too frequent in that world. The marriage is a business arrangement, he said, every word measured. You knew that before you came here. You've known it your whole life. Business arrangement. Rosa crossed her arms. Is that what you call selling a woman like cattle? No one is selling you. No. Then let me see if I understand the terms. She raised one finger. I marry you. Another finger. I bear an heir. Third finger. I spend the rest of my life pretending that the Ferrante family and the Santoro family are one big happy family, while you keep doing what you've always done. Am I right so far? His jaw contracted again. It's more complex than that. Oh, certainly. There's also the part where my father and yours shook hands over my uterus before I even knew what menstruation was. That adds a lovely layer of complexity, don't you think? Rosa. No. She raised her hand, and he, to her surprise, stopped talking. You're not going to interrupt me. You're not going to give me that women and their emotions look. And you definitely aren't going to treat me like one of your subordinates who says, yes, Don Ferrante, to everything that comes out of that arrogant mouth of yours. For a moment, something sparked in his eyes. It wasn't anger. Rosa knew Patrick's anger, and this wasn't it. It was something closer to Interest? As if she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. Are you finished now? He repeated the question, but this time there was something different in his tone. Not yet. Rosa straightened her shoulders. I'm going to marry you, Patrick. Not because I want to, not because my father ordered me to, but because if I don't, the Santoro and Ferrante families go to war and innocent people die. People who work for our families. People who didn't ask to be born into this world. She took a step forward. Now there were only inches between them. But I have conditions. Something that could be a smile or a threat curved his lips. Conditions. One condition. Singular. Rosa held his gaze without wavering. The mistress disappears before the ceremony. The apartment became so silent she could hear the antique clock ticking in the office. She could hear Milan's traffic 40 floors below. She could hear her own heart beating steady, refusing to race. And if I say no? Then I walk into that ceremony and tell all the allied families, including the Marchettis, the De Lucas, and the Volkovs, exactly why my husband needed to leave the party early at my own wedding. She tilted her head. How long do you think your reputation as the man who controls everything survives after that? For the first time since she'd known him, Patrick Ferrante looked genuinely surprised. It was brief, lasted maybe half a second. But Rosa saw it, and she would never forget. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you a choice. Something no one gave me. He stepped back, turned, walked to the panoramic window that showed Milan's skyline bathed in golden sunset. For a long moment, he just stood there, his back to her, hands in the pockets of his perfectly tailored trousers. Rosa waited. She was good at that, waiting. Years of restoring artwork had taught her that patience was more valuable than speed, that the most precious things revealed their layers with time, not force. Have you always been like this? He asked without turning. Like what? Impossible. You never bothered to find out. He finally looked over his shoulder. The sunlight transformed those gray eyes into something softer, almost silver. For a fraction of a second, he didn't look like the man who had made 3 rivals disappear in the last year. He just looked tired. Fair, he said. And then the private elevator door opened. Pedro Ferrante entered the apartment carrying a leather briefcase and an expression that crumbled the instant he saw Rosa. The twins were identical in everything, the height, the features, the sharp bone structure. But where Patrick was ice, Pedro was something warmer, gentler. His eyes found Rosa's with an intensity she had always struggled to name, but that made her feel seen in a way Patrick never could. Rosa. Pedro's voice was softer than his brother's. I didn't know you were... He looked at Patrick. Am I interrupting something? No, Patrick answered immediately. Miss Santoro was just leaving. Miss Santoro. After 18 years. Rosa swallowed the acid response burning on her tongue. Not here. Not in front of Pedro, who was looking at her with that expression she couldn't decipher. Concern? Pain? Something deeper? Actually, she said, picking up her purse from the sofa, I have one last thing to say. Patrick turned completely. The 2 brothers now stared at her, a wall of dark suits and Ferrante masculinity. I'm going to marry you, Patrick. I'm going to bear the air the contract demands. I'm going to attend family dinners and smile for the cameras and play the perfect wife when necessary. She walked to the elevator door, stopping beside Pedro, close enough to feel his warmth, close enough to notice how he held his breath. But I'm not going to love you, she continued, looking directly at Patrick. I'm not going to give you my heart. I'm not going to pretend this is anything beyond what it is, a transaction. And if you break your part of the deal, she smiled, and there was nothing sweet in that smile. You'll discover that Santoro women are much better at holding grudges than Ferrante men are at holding power. The elevator opened behind her. You have 3 weeks to get rid of her, Patrick. Use them wisely. Rosa stepped into the elevator without looking back. But just as the doors began to close, she saw Pedro looking at her with a silent devastation that cut her heart in two. And Patrick watched her with something that could be fury, or could be the beginning of respect. 20 minutes later, Rosa Santoro stood in front of her apartment bathroom mirror, her hands trembling. What did I do? The bravado had evaporated the moment she left that building. The speech rehearsed for weeks finally delivered, every word calculated for maximum impact. She had played all her cards, and now she could only hope Patrick wouldn't decide to call her bluff. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. Rosa had no real power. She was a piece in a game that had started before she was born. Daughter of Enzo Santoro's second marriage, born as collateral, raised as currency. Her phone vibrated. Lucia. My source in the Ferrante family says Patrick is making calls. Many calls. You rattled him. Rosa typed with still trembling fingers. Rosa. Is that good or bad? Lucia. Depends. Do you want him to respect you or hate you? Rosa. Respect would be a start. 3 dots appeared and disappeared. Appeared again. Lucia. He sent Marcella away, the mistress. Put her on a flight to Lisbon 15 minutes ago. Rosa sat on the edge of the bathtub, her phone slipping from her fingers. It worked. It worked. For the first time in 23 years, she had achieved something on her own terms. It wasn't freedom. Freedom didn't exist for people like her. But it was control. A tiny fragment of control in a life that had never really been hers. The phone vibrated again. Lucia. Be careful, cousin. Patrick Ferrante is not a man who accepts defeat. He's going to want to recover ground. And he'll do it in a way you're not expecting. Rosa looked at her reflection, dark hair that never quite stayed in place, brown eyes she had inherited from the mother she barely remembered, the stubborn Santoro chin that had made her father give up trying to control her years ago. Then let him come, she said to herself. I'm ready. But when she closed her eyes, it wasn't Patrick she saw. It was Pedro. Those eyes identical to his brother's, but infinitely different. Carrying something she had always pretended not to notice because noticing would be too impossible. Rosa had agreed to marry the wrong twin, and all 3 of them knew it. On the other side of the city, in the darkened office of the Ferrante penthouse, Pedro stood exactly where Rosa had been an hour before. His fingers held the towel with the red lipstick, the evidence of the crime that Marcella hadn't even bothered to hide. Patrick entered silently. You should have left. I saw her leave, Pedro said without turning. She was crying in the elevator. Did you see? No. You never see. Patrick crossed his arms. Do you want to say something, brother? Pedro finally turned. The dim office light created shadows on his face that made him look older, heavier. As if he carried a weight Patrick could never understand. Do you deserve her? The question came out low, controlled, but beneath it was something more dangerous. The contract says I do. Contracts don't make marriages. You're right. Patrick took a step forward. Power makes marriages. Alliances make marriages. And right now, the marriage to Rosa Santoro is the only thing standing between us and the Marchettis. The mention of that name made Pedro go rigid. What did you find out? They're moving, fast. 3 of our territories in Naples were approached in the last week. And the De Lucas are considering switching sides. So that's it. The marriage is about the Marchettis. The marriage is about survival. Patrick took the towel from his brother's hands and threw it in the trash. Rosa understands that better than you think. And Marcella? Lisbon. Pedro made a sound that could have been a laugh in a parallel universe. She gave an ultimatum and you obeyed. She protected her dignity. That I respect. What exactly do you respect? The fact that she discovered your mistress or the fact that she played your own rules against you? Patrick studied his brother for a long moment. Their eyes were identical. The same color, the same shape, the same memories of a childhood neither of them liked to revisit. But where Patrick saw the world as a chessboard, Pedro saw it as something more complicated. Something with colors and shadows and nuances that Patrick never had time to consider. "You love her," Patrick said. It wasn't a question. Pedro didn't answer. "For how long?" "Does it matter? You're my brother. And she's my—" Pedro stopped. What was Rosa? Nothing he could name. "She's her own, Patrick. That's the only thing neither of us can take from her." Patrick went to the bar in the corner of the office, poured 2 whiskeys, extended one to his brother. "You're right," he said. "I don't deserve her. But the contract doesn't ask who deserves whom. The contract asks who can protect the family, and right now, that person is me." Pedro took the glass, but didn't drink. "And if I asked you to break the agreement?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Then we both know where we stand," Pedro said. He placed the untouched glass on the table and walked toward the door. "Pedro." He stopped but didn't look back. "I'm going to do right by her," Patrick said. "Not out of love, but out of respect. And maybe that's more than she expects from me." "Maybe it's more than you expect from yourself," Pedro replied. And then he was gone, leaving Patrick alone with his whiskey and an engagement ring that weighed more than any weapon he had ever held. 3 days before the wedding, Rosa discovered that Patrick Ferrante had a sense of humor. A terrible one. "You invited my father to dinner," she said, staring at the embossed invitation in her hands. "Tonight." "At your penthouse." Patrick didn't look up from his laptop. "Our penthouse, in 3 days. You could have warned me. I'm warning you now." Rosa counted to 10 in Italian, then in Portuguese, then in a language she invented specifically for moments involving Patrick Ferrante. "The dinner is in 4 hours. Then you should probably start getting ready." She threw the invitation at his head. He caught it without looking, which was infuriating, and finally raised those gray eyes to meet hers. "Was that necessary?" "Incredibly." Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make Rosa's blood pressure spike. "Wear the green dress," he said. "The one from Milan Fashion Week." "How do you know about that dress?" "I know everything about what enters my territory." He returned to his laptop. 4 hours, Rosa." The green dress fit like revenge. Rosa studied herself in the mirror of the guest bedroom, because she refused to share Patrick's room before the wedding, and possibly after, and allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. The silk hugged every curve she'd earned through years of climbing scaffolding to restore Renaissance ceilings. The color made her skin glow and her eyes spark. If she was going to face her father and her future husband in the same room, she would do it looking like a weapon. A knock on the door. "Rosa," Pedro's voice. "May I come in?" Her heart did something complicated. Yes. He entered wearing a charcoal suit that made him look softer than his brother despite their identical features. His eyes found her immediately, and she watched him forget how to breathe. "You look—" He stopped, swallowed. "Patrick will be insufferable." Patrick is always insufferable. True. Pedro smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I came to warn you. Your father brought Tommaso." Rosa's blood ran cold. "My brother is here?" "Arrived 10 minutes ago. He's already arguing with Patrick about territory lines." "Of course he is." Tommaso Santoro, her half-brother from her father's first marriage, had never accepted Rosa as family. To him, she was the product of their father's weakness, a second wife who had died too young and left behind a daughter who reminded Enzo of everything he'd lost. "I can intervene," Pedro offered, "if things get—" "No." Rosa straightened her spine. "I fight my own battles." Pedro stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something warm, woodsy, nothing like Patrick's sharp sophistication. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Fight alone, I mean." Their eyes met, held. The air between them thickened with 18 years of unspoken words. Pedro, I know. He stepped back, and the moment shattered. I know. He left without another word, and Rosa pressed her hand against her chest, willing her heart to slow down. Wrong twin, her mind whispered. You're marrying the wrong twin. The dinner was a battlefield disguised as a 5-course meal. Rosa sat between Patrick and her father, which meant she had a front-row seat to 2 alpha males pretending to be civilized while threatening each other with dessert forks. The Marchetti situation requires immediate action, Enzo Santoro said, swirling his wine. At 62, he still commanded every room he entered. They've approached 3 of our joint territories. I'm aware, Patrick replied coolly. I've already handled it. Handled it how? With the discretion the situation required. Tommaso snorted from across the table. Discretion? Is that what we're calling it when 2 Marchetti soldiers disappear from Naples? The table went silent. Rosa watched Patrick's expression remain perfectly neutral. Not a flicker of guilt, not a shadow of doubt, just ice. I don't know what you're referring to, Patrick said. Of course you don't. Tommaso. Enzo's voice cut through the tension. Enough. Father, you can't seriously. I said enough. Rosa used the moment to glance at Pedro, who sat at the far end of the table. He was watching Patrick with an expression she couldn't read. Concern, disapproval, something darker. The wedding will proceed as planned, Enzo continued. After that, we present a united front against the Marchettis. And if they don't back down? Tommaso asked. Patrick smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Then they'll learn why the Ferrante name has survived 4 generations. After dinner, Rosa escaped to the balcony. The Milan skyline glittered below, indifferent to the power plays happening 40 floors above. She breathed in the cool night air and tried to remember who she'd been before all of this, before contracts and alliances and a future mapped out by men who saw her as a chess piece. Hiding. She didn't turn. Breathing. Patrick appeared beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Your brother hates me, he finally said. My brother hates everyone. Don't feel special. I don't. Rosa glanced at him. In the moonlight, with his guard slightly lowered, he almost looked human. Why did you send Marcella away? She asked. You demanded it. That's not an answer. Patrick turned to face her fully. You were right. Starting a marriage with public humiliation benefits no one. I may not have chosen this arrangement, but I won't sabotage it with carelessness. How romantic. Romance wasn't part of the contract. No, Rosa agreed. It wasn't. They stood in silence. 2 strangers bound by blood oaths. Neither had signed. 3 days, Patrick said. 3 days, Rosa echoed. Somewhere inside she heard Pedro laugh at something. A real laugh, warm and genuine. And her heart cracked a little more. The night before her wedding, Rosa couldn't sleep. She wandered through the penthouse at 3 a.m., barefoot in silk pajamas, trying to memorize a home that didn't feel like hers. The marble floors were cold. The artwork was expensive but soulless. Everything screamed Patrick Ferrante. Controlled, perfect, untouchable. She found Pedro in the kitchen. He stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the city below. He hadn't heard her approach, and for a moment, Rosa simply watched him. In the darkness, without the constant comparison to his brother, Pedro looked different. Softer, sadder, like a man carrying a weight he never asked for. Can't sleep either, she finally said. He turned sharply, whiskey sloshing. Rosa, I didn't. You shouldn't. Relax. I'm just getting water. She moved past him to the refrigerator, hyper-aware of his presence. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too intimate. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked. Terrified. The honesty surprised them both. But not for the reasons you'd think. What reasons, then? Rosa poured herself a glass of water, using the action to avoid his eyes. I'm not afraid of marrying Patrick. I'm afraid of disappearing into this world completely, becoming just another mafia wife who hosts dinners and produces heirs and forgets she ever wanted something more. You could never disappear. Pedro's voice was rough. You're the most visible person in any room. She looked up. Their eyes met across the kitchen island. Pedro, don't. He set down his glass. Whatever you're going to say, don't. Not tonight. I was going to say thank you. He blinked. For what? For 18 years of making me feel like I mattered. Not as a contract, not as collateral, just me. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they couldn't say. Then Pedro moved. 3 steps around the island, and he was in front of her. Close enough to touch. Close enough to destroy everything. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before tomorrow. Before it's too late. Rosa's heart stopped. Pedro, we can't. I love you. The words hung in the air like a confession, like a prayer, like a death sentence. I've loved you since I was 16 years old, he continued, each word costing him something vital. I've watched you grow into this incredible woman, knowing you were never meant to be mine. And tomorrow, I'm going to stand beside my brother while he marries you, and I'm going to smile, and I'm going to pretend my heart isn't. Rosa kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't smart. It was desperate and broken and absolutely wrong. For 3 perfect seconds, Pedro kissed her back. Then he pulled away like she'd burned him. We can't, he breathed. Rosa, we can't. I know. If Patrick finds out, I know. They stood there, foreheads almost touching, breathing the same air, trapped in an impossible moment. I'm sorry, Rosa whispered. Don't be. Pedro stepped back, putting distance between them like armor. I needed you to know, before you become his wife. I needed you to know that someone in this family sees you, really sees you. Pedro! A sound from the hallway. Footsteps. They sprang apart as Patrick entered the kitchen, his expression unreadable. Interesting time for a family meeting, he said. Rosa's blood turned to ice. How much had he heard? How much had he seen? I couldn't sleep, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Pedro was keeping me company. How thoughtful of him. Patrick's eyes moved between them, calculating. Pedro, father called. There's a situation in Naples that requires your attention. Now? Immediately. The brothers stared at each other. Something unspoken passed between them. A warning, a threat, a plea. Of course, Pedro finally said. He looked at Rosa one last time, his eyes carrying everything he couldn't say. Good night, Rosa. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she echoed. He left without looking back. Rosa faced Patrick alone, waiting for the accusation, the explosion, the consequences. Instead, he simply said, Get some sleep. You have a long day ahead. And walked away. Rosa didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss like a wound she couldn't stop touching. Pedro loved her. Pedro loved her. And in 12 hours, she would marry his brother. Her phone buzzed. Lucia. Marchetti soldiers spotted near the venue. Security tripled. Be careful tomorrow. Rosa's blood ran cold. The wedding wasn't just a ceremony. It was a target. She typed back, How serious? Lucia. Serious enough that Patrick hasn't slept in 3 days. He's personally reviewing every security detail. Rosa sat up in bed, her mind racing. Patrick wasn't sleeping. Patrick was protecting her, protecting everyone, while she was in the kitchen kissing his brother. Guilt crashed over her like a wave. Whatever Patrick was, whatever their arrangement meant, he didn't deserve betrayal. Not from her. Not from Pedro. Not like this. She made a decision. Tomorrow, she would marry Patrick Ferrante. She would honor the contract. She would become the wife the alliance demanded, and she would bury whatever she felt for Pedro so deep that even she would forget it existed. It was the only way any of them survived this. Rosa Santoro became Rosa Ferrante on a Saturday afternoon, surrounded by 500 guests and 12 hidden snipers. She learned about the snipers later. The ceremony took place in a converted palazzo outside Milan, its ancient walls draped in white roses and guarded by enough security to invade a small country. Rosa walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face a perfect mask, her heart a battlefield. Patrick waited at the altar in a black suit that probably cost more than her apartment. His expression revealed nothing. Not anticipation, not reluctance, not even boredom. Just perfect, controlled neutrality. Pedro stood beside him as best man. Their eyes met for one devastating second. Then Rosa looked away. Bury it, she reminded herself. Bury it deep. Dearly beloved, the officiant began. Rosa barely heard the words. She was too busy cataloging every exit, every guard, every subtle tension in Patrick's shoulders. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Then she noticed his hand. Hidden from the guests, pressed against his thigh, Patrick's left hand was clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. A small earpiece glinted in his ear, nearly invisible. He was receiving updates. During their wedding. "Do you, Patrick Ferrante, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was steady, but Rosa saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "And do you, Rosa Santoro, take this man?" A commotion at the back of the church, guests turning, whispers spreading. Patrick's hand shot out and grabbed hers, the first time he'd ever initiated contact. His grip was iron. "Say it," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "Now." "I do. I now pronounce you husband and wife." Patrick kissed her before the officiant finished speaking. It was brief, possessive, and entirely for show, but his lips brushed her ear as he pulled back. "Smile. We're leaving through the east exit. Marchetti's breached the perimeter." Rosa smiled brilliantly for the cameras. Inside, she was screaming. The reception became a carefully orchestrated evacuation. To the guests, nothing seemed amiss. The music played, the champagne flowed, the happy couple made their rounds, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Behind the scenes, Ferrante soldiers moved families to secure locations. Cars were rerouted. The Marchetti intruders, 3 of them, disguised as catering staff, were quietly neutralized. Rosa learned that word later too. Neutralized. "You're handling this well," Patrick said during their first dance. "I'm handling nothing. I'm being handled." "Same thing in this world." She looked up at him, her husband, a word that still felt foreign. What happened to them? The Marchettis? They won't bother anyone again. That's not an answer. It's the only one you need. Rosa should have been horrified. Instead, she felt an unsettling sense of safety. Patrick Ferrante was a monster. But tonight, he was her monster. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting everyone." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. "You're my wife now. Protecting you is no longer optional." "I meant the guests, the families, my father." Patrick was silent for a long moment, guiding her through the dance with practiced ease. "My mother was killed at a wedding," he finally said. "I was 8. Pedro and I watched her die because my father's security was insufficient." His voice remained flat, but his grip on her waist tightened. "That will never happen under my watch. To anyone." Rosa's heart clenched. "Patrick, I didn't know." "No one does, and you'll keep it that way." "Of course." The song ended. Patrick released her, his walls already rebuilding. "Enjoy the party, Mrs. Ferrante. We leave in 1 hour." He walked away, leaving Rosa alone on the dance floor with a new understanding of the man she'd married. Pedro found her hiding in the garden. "Dangerous to be out here alone," he said, stepping from the shadows. "I'm never alone anymore. There are 4 guards pretending to be statues within 50 feet. Pedro almost smiled. You noticed. I'm observant. They stood in silence, the party's distant music drifting through the hedges. The moonlight turned everything silver and strange. Congratulations, Pedro said. The words sounded like broken glass. Don't. I have to. You're my brother's wife now. Rosa closed her eyes. What happened in the kitchen never happened. His voice was firm. For everyone's sake, especially yours, it never happened. Pedro, he'll be good to you. Pedro stepped closer, then stopped himself. Patrick is many things, but he honors his commitments. You'll be safe with him. I don't want safe. I want... She stopped. What did she want? Freedom? Love? Both felt equally impossible. You want what none of us can have, Pedro finished. A choice. Yes. He reached out, almost touched her face, then let his hand fall. Make the best of the choice that was made for you. Find happiness where you can. And know that somewhere in this family, someone loves you without conditions or contracts. Pedro, please, goodbye, Rosa. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with her wedding ring and her breaking heart. The honeymoon suite was cold, not the temperature. Patrick kept everything at a precise 68 degrees. But the atmosphere. 2 strangers in a beautiful room, bound by law and blood oaths, with no idea what came next. I'll take the couch, Patrick said, already removing his jacket. You don't have to. The contract requires an heir. It doesn't specify when. He hung his jacket with military precision. I won't touch you until you're ready. That was always my intention. Rosa stared at him. Why? Because consent matters, even in arranged marriages, perhaps especially then. And for the second time that night, Patrick Ferrante surprised her. You're not what I expected, she admitted. Neither are you. He loosened his tie, finally showing a crack in his armor. You stood in my apartment and threatened me with social destruction. You walked down an aisle knowing there were armed intruders in the building. You haven't flinched once. I flinched plenty. Just internally. That almost smile again. Get some sleep, Rosa. Tomorrow, we start figuring out how to survive each other. 3 weeks into marriage, Rosa discovered Patrick's secret. He painted. She found him at 2 a.m. in a hidden room behind his office, a space that didn't exist on any floor plan. Canvases lined the walls, abstract explosions of color and rage and something painfully vulnerable. You shouldn't be here, he said without turning. The door was open. It's never open. Rosa stepped inside anyway. The paintings surrounded her, dark blues bleeding into violent reds, shapes that looked like screams frozen in oil, beautiful and terrible. These are yours? Patrick finally turned. He wore a paint-stained shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. A weakness I can't seem to eliminate. It's not weakness. It's art. Same thing in my world. Rosa moved closer to a canvas, depicting what might have been a woman falling or flying through darkness. Who taught you? My mother. The word landed heavy. Before the wedding. Before the bullet. Before Patrick Ferrante became the man everyone feared. They're incredible. They're private. Then why was the door open? Patrick stared at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made. Maybe I wanted you to find them. After that night, things changed. Small things. Patrick started taking breakfast with her, instead of disappearing at dawn. He asked about her restoration work, actually listened when she explained the chemistry of paint preservation. He laughed once, a real laugh, when she accidentally knocked coffee onto a priceless manuscript. You're not angry? She'd asked, horrified. It's just paper. You should see what I've destroyed. Rosa began to see glimpses of who Patrick might have been without the weight of the Ferrante legacy. Someone curious, someone wounded, someone desperately trying to control everything, because he'd once watched everything spiral beyond control. She didn't love him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she was starting to understand him. The Marchetti attack came on a Tuesday. Rosa was leaving her restoration studio, a space Patrick had built for her in the penthouse, a gesture that had stunned her silent, when the elevator opened to chaos. 2 men, guns drawn, Marchetti symbols on their necks. Mrs. Ferrante, the larger one, smiled. "You're coming with us." Rosa's training kicked in. Not combat training, Patrick had offered. She'd refused. But something deeper. 18 years of surviving in mafia families had taught her that panic killed faster than bullets. "I don't think I am." "You don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." She took a step back, calculating distances. The panic button was 6 feet away. The studio door was reinforced. If she could just... The smaller man grabbed her arm. Rosa screamed, not in fear, but in rage, and drove her elbow into his throat. He stumbled. She ran. The gunshot missed her by inches. Then the studio door exploded inward, and Patrick Ferrante entered like a hurricane. She didn't see what happened next. She heard it, the sounds of violence, controlled and brutal, while she crouched behind her workbench, hands over her ears. When silence fell, Patrick appeared beside her. "Are you hurt?" His hands ran over her arms, her face checking for wounds. His fingers were shaking. "No, Patrick, I'm fine." He pulled her against his chest. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. A man confronting the possibility of loss and rejecting it with everything he had. "They're dead?" she asked into his shoulder. "They're dealt with. That's not... Rosa." He pulled back, gripping her shoulders. His eyes were wild, the first real emotion she'd ever seen from him. "They will never touch you again. No one will ever touch you again." "Do you understand?" She understood. Patrick Ferrante was falling for his own wife. That night, Rosa called Lucia. "He killed 2 men for me," she said, still processing, without hesitation. "That's his job." It felt like more. Silence on the line. Then, "Rosa, what's happening?" "I don't know." She pressed her palm against her forehead. "He paints, Lucia, in secret, these beautiful, heartbreaking paintings, and he built me a studio. And he hasn't touched me, not once, because he said consent matters." "Patrick Ferrante said that?" "I know how it sounds. It sounds like you're falling for your husband." "That's impossible. I love..." She stopped. "Pedro." She loved Pedro, didn't she? But when she closed her eyes now, she didn't see Pedro's warm smile. She saw Patrick's shaking hands running over her skin, checking for wounds. She saw gray eyes wild with fear for her safety. "Rosa?" Lucia's voice was gentle. "Maybe love doesn't always look how we expect. Maybe I'm just confused. Or maybe you're finally seeing clearly." Rosa found Patrick in his studio at midnight. He stood before a new canvas, this one different from the others. Instead of darkness and rage, it showed light breaking through storm clouds. A figure standing in the beam, face turned upward. "Is that me?" she asked. Patrick didn't answer. He just set down his brush and looked at her with something terrifyingly close to honesty. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Love, marriage, any of it. I was raised to conquer, not to connect. I wasn't raised much better. You're different. You feel things openly. You fight back. You make me want to be someone worth fighting for." Rosa moved closer. "Patrick, I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that this stopped being a contract for me somewhere between your lipstick ultimatum and tonight." Her heart pounded. "What is it now?" "I don't know." He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But I'd like to find out, if you'll let me." Rosa thought of Pedro, his confession, his sacrifice, his goodbye. Then she thought of the man before her, flawed, dangerous, trying so hard to be better. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's find out." Patrick kissed her. This time it wasn't for show. 6 months later, Rosa Ferrante made a choice. Not the choice her father had made for her. Not the choice the contract demanded. A real choice. The first truly free decision of her life. She chose to stay. The Marchetti War ended on a rainy Thursday. Rosa wasn't supposed to be there. Patrick had explicitly forbidden her presence at the negotiation, if it could be called that, between the Ferrante family and what remained of the Marchetti leadership. She came anyway. "You married a stubborn woman," she told Patrick as she walked into the warehouse. "Deal with it." He should have been furious. Instead, he almost smiled. "Stay behind me." Obviously. The meeting was tense. Salvatore Marchetti, the last surviving son of the family patriarch, sat across from Patrick with hatred burning in his eyes. But hatred wasn't enough anymore. The Marchettis were broken, their soldiers scattered, their allies gone. "This ends tonight," Patrick said. "You leave Italy. Your family never returns. In exchange, I let you walk out of here breathing. You killed my brothers. They tried to kidnap my wife. I showed restraint." Rosa watched her husband negotiate, calm, controlled, utterly dominant. This was the man the underworld feared, the man who had built an empire on calculated violence and unshakable will. And somehow, impossibly, he was hers. "Fine," Salvatore spat. "We leave. But this isn't over, Ferrante. It is for you." The Marchettis left. The war ended, and Rosa finally exhaled. That night, Patrick found her on their balcony. "You shouldn't have come," he said, standing beside her. "You keep saying that. I keep ignoring you." I noticed. The city glittered below them, their kingdom, their cage, their home. 6 months of marriage had transformed everything. The penthouse no longer felt cold. The artwork no longer seemed soulless. Somewhere between midnight painting sessions and breakfast conversations, Rosa had stopped surviving and started living. "I need to tell you something," she said. Patrick tensed. "About Pedro?" The name hung between them. They'd never discussed that night in the kitchen, never acknowledged what had almost happened. But Patrick knew. Of course he knew. "Yes." Silence. Then, "I'm listening. Before the wedding, he told me he loved me. He'd loved me for years." Rosa kept her eyes on the skyline. "I kissed him. Once. For 3 seconds. And I've carried the guilt ever since." Patrick didn't move. Didn't speak. "I'm telling you because I'm done with secrets," she continued. "And because you deserve to know that I chose you. Not because of the contract. Not because of obligation. I chose you because you built me a studio and showed me your paintings and protected me without asking for anything in return. Rosa, I love you, Patrick." She finally turned to face him. "I didn't expect to. I didn't want to. But somewhere between your impossible demands and your hidden vulnerability, I fell completely in love with my own husband." Patrick stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a real laugh, broken and relieved. "You kissed my brother, and you're apologizing by confessing your love for me? Is it working?" "Infuriatingly, yes." He pulled her close, and Rosa melted into him, this man of contradictions, this monster with a painter's soul. "I knew about the kiss," he admitted against her hair. "I saw you through the window reflection. And you still married me? I married you because of it. Because you kissed him and still walked down that aisle. Because you chose duty over desire. Because I knew if I could earn your heart, instead of demanding it, it would actually mean something." Rosa pulled back to look at him. "That's either incredibly romantic or deeply manipulative. Probably both. I'm working on it. Work faster." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. Pedro came to say goodbye on a Sunday morning. He was leaving for New York, overseeing Ferrante operations abroad, a convenient exile that spared everyone the daily reminder of impossible feelings. Rosa met him in the garden, the same garden where he'd said goodbye at her wedding. "You look happy," he said. "I am. He's treating you well. Better than well. He's treating me like a partner." Pedro nodded slowly. The sadness was still there, would probably always be there, but something else had joined it. Acceptance, maybe. Or peace. "I'm glad." He meant it. "You deserve happiness, Rosa, even if it looks different than we imagined." "Pedro, don't." He smiled, and it was almost the warm smile she remembered. "I'm okay. I will be okay. Loving you taught me what I want in life. Now I just need to find someone who's actually available." Rosa laughed, despite the ache in her chest. "She's out there." "I hope so." He stepped forward, kissed her cheek softly. "Goodbye, Rosa Ferrante." "Goodbye, Pedro." He walked away. This time Rosa let him go. That evening, Patrick found her in the studio, standing before her latest restoration, a Renaissance masterpiece she'd spent 3 months saving from decay. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's 500 years old. Someone loved it enough to preserve it through wars and plagues and empires falling. That's what I think about when I work. All that love, surviving through time." Patrick wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Is that what we're building? Something that survives?" Rosa leaned into him. "I think so. Yes." "Good." His hand moved to her stomach, a gesture that had become familiar over the past week, since she'd shown him the test. "Because we're going to need something strong for what comes next." Rosa smiled, placing her hand over his. The contract had demanded an heir, but this child, their child, was so much more than an obligation. It was a choice, their choice. And for the first time in her life, Rosa Ferrante was exactly where she wanted to be. The end.